gentlemen, we're just about ready to begin tonight. And I have my lovely ushers in the back. And darlings, you can help seat anybody that comes in late and just help them to find a seat comfortably. And we're ready to begin. And I know we have some lovely music tonight. And we're singing Eagle's Wings, my dear. And where is that? Number 611. Let's stand up with a smile on our faces and praise the Lord. Shelter of the Lord, who abide in his shadow for life. Say to the Lord, my refuge, my rock in whom I trust, and he will raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. The sparrow, the fowler, will never capture you, and under his wings your refuge, his faithfulness your shield, and he will raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. Well, good evening. Well, let's begin this evening in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The Lord be with you. Turn around, say hello to each other, welcome each other tonight, meet somebody you don't know. We welcome everybody tonight in a very special way. And always we thank, especially anybody that brought somebody, that invited somebody, or especially if you brought one of our wonderful senior citizens tonight, we want to thank you in a special way. And as we gather tonight, Ann, darling, could you get me a bottle of water, sweetheart? Give her a poke on the shoulder there, and a bottle of water, darling. As we gather, let's raise our minds and hearts in prayer. Loving Father, we come as your family here at Holy Cross this evening for our parish retreat. We ask you to open our hearts with the power of your Holy Spirit, to touch them with your love and your healing. Open our minds with wisdom. Open our hearts to embrace the faith that you have given us, the faith in that sure knowledge of your love, of your constant care, and faith that one day you will prepare a place for us to live in peace and joy forever and ever. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a seat. Well, tonight, our gospel reading is from St. Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "Take the lilies of the field. They do not spin, they do not weave, but I tell you, Solomon, in all his splendor, was not arrayed as any of these. If God clothes in such splendor the grass of the field, which grows today and is thrown into the fire tomorrow, how much more will he provide for you, O weak in faith? It is not for you to be in search of what you are to eat or drink. Stop worrying. The unbelievers of this world are always running after these things. Your Father knows that you need such things. Seek instead his kingship over you, and the rest will follow in turn. Do not live in fear, little flock. It has pleased your Father to give you the kingdom. Sell what you have, give alms. Get purses for yourselves that do not wear out, a never-failing treasure with the Lord, which no thief comes near, nor any moth destroys. For wherever your heart is, there your treasure will be." The Gospel of the Lord. Well, tonight, I've chosen that, just put them down there. That's fine. Tonight, I've chosen that reading because of what we're talking about. Tonight's talk is entitled, "See It Big, Keep It Simple." Putting life in a Christian perspective. Now, I also didn't come up with that title myself. I also stole it. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Well, actually, that title came to me from a friend of mine. A few years back, I took a sabbatical, not a leave of absence. They gave me a chance to take some extra studies, midway through my career, and so I took advantage of it. Did you ever get a sabbatical? How about you, darling? You ever get a sabbatical? You could have used one, right? Yeah, use one right now, a sabbatical from him. There you go, all right? Well, I was going to take a few months and study some more scripture or theology. But the more I thought of it, I said to myself, well, you've got some letters behind your name and you've spent a lot of time in school, which we Dominicans do. And I thought, maybe I need to do something totally different. And I decided to take up painting. And I don't know where this came from, because I was never an artistic type. I hadn't drawn anything since I was a little kid in grammar school. Except for doodling at a telephone book, but I don't know where this idea came from. Perhaps it came from the Holy Spirit. But instead of doing something academic, because maybe I was too academically oriented, this notion of taking up painting came to me. And I told this friend of mine, Mary Lathrop, whose uncle was a painter of a little renown. He was somewhat well known in New England, and he taught art at a college level. And she said, well, I think it's a great idea, and I'm going to give you the advice that my uncle used to give to his students. See it big, keep it simple. When you go to paint something, see it big. Whatever it is that you have in mind, see it in your mind's eye already on that canvas. Whether it's a bowl of fruit or a landscape or an abstract or a portrait, see it large on that canvas. And then when you go to paint it, keep it simple. Don't mess it up. Know when to walk away. It's true in a lot of things in life, isn't it? It's true with a lot of art. I bet there's some good cooks. With all the Italians in this parish, they better know how to cook, right? And the art of cooking is knowing when to walk away. One more shot of Tabasco sauce and you're going to ruin it. We're going to have the fire department in there, okay? It's knowing when to walk away. Keep it simple. It's good advice for painting. It's probably better advice for living. And when she gave me that phrase, I thought, there's a title of a talk. So I had to come up with a talk to fit that great title. See it big, keep it simple. Because it is good advice for life. And those are our two watchwords for this evening. See it big. And keep it simple. And this is what we're going to do tonight, is to take a look at those two words and fill them in. See it big. See the big picture in life. Have that perspective. And again, the title of this talk is about having a Christian perspective in life. But a lot of people miss the big picture. See it big. Try to see life as large as you can. And just as in painting, don't get all hung up on one little detail. See it big. Don't get hung up trying to paint one little eyelash or one little leaf on a twig. Move on. See the big picture in life. You know, there was an old nun that gave me some good advice. And she gave me advice that I'd never heard a nun give. You know, she said, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Now, I'm an old New Englander, and that is not the way I grew up, you know. And no nun that I ever had in grammar school ever said, you know, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And she sort of chuckled when she said it to me, this old gal. And I realized, yeah, she's right. Sometimes you just have to get something done, don't you? Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Perfectionists become neurotic people. We can drive ourselves into a tailspin, trying to get something absolutely perfect, trying to get that leaf on the tree just perfect. Sometimes you just have to move on. You know, you spend the day cooking and the souffle goes flat. Well, you just got to put it on the table because they're coming to dinner. Just put it on the table. You know? If something goes wrong, then you make the best of it. That's why everybody loved Julia Childs, didn't they? Wasn't she great? You know, she lived to be 90-something years old. They say she was half in the bag most of the time. Which she always had a wine glass under the sink there. But, you know, she is the one that introduced French cooking to the United States. And everybody was so intimidated by French cooking. And she made it not simple, but she made it real and doable. And because she was rather casual about some things. You know, she'd drop something on the floor. She'd say, oh, you just dust it off, you know, put it back, you know, they'll never know the difference, you know. And Americans became less intimidated. And sometimes you just have to get something done. See it big. See the large picture in life. Don't get all hung up on the problem and the dilemma of the moment. That's what that old nun meant. Sometimes you just have to do it. You have to get through it. It's not going to be perfect. This is going to be a rough day. Just get through it. Do the best you can, but get it done, for God's sakes. Because sometimes we get so hung up on the problem at hand that we don't do anything. We're afraid to move. We become paralyzed. Or sometimes we become so overwhelmed and we think that my little problem, my difficulty of the moment defines the whole of life. It becomes the whole world. There's an old Yiddish saying that says, to a worm in a horseradish, the whole world is a horseradish. That's all they know. Now, can you imagine what a dung beetle might think life is all about? And sometimes it is, okay? But sometimes we become so enmeshed and so overwhelmed by our little horseradish that we think that the whole world consists in this problem, this dilemma, my little world of the moment. See it big, keep it simple. Well, of course, we're going to start at this end of the equation. See it big. What is the big picture in life from a Christian perspective? It begins with knowing that we are blessed. To me, the basic fact of human existence for a Christian, for a believer, is that we are blessed. That we have come from the blessed hand of God. You know, when you read the book of Genesis and the story of creation, right in the very first chapters, the first chapter of Genesis, where God creates all that there is, all the wonders of the universe, of space, of the earth, of the animals, the oceans, all of that. He stands back and he says, it is good. And then after he creates Adam and Eve, the crowning glory of his creation, he stands back and he says, it is very good. And that pronouncement of goodness has resounded in creation and in the human heart ever since. God has made us good. Now, some of you are sitting here right now and you're saying, okay, Buster, what about original sin? Well, that's true. As Christians, we believe in original sin. But as Catholics, our vision, our view of original sin is much more subtle and a little different than many of our fundamentalist brothers and sisters. Now, if you listen to some of the preachers on TV, the kind of classic evangelical view is that we are utterly corrupt. You'll often hear that. We are sinful. Everything we do is sinful. I heard Jimmy Swaggart once. I just came back from Hungary. If you ever get a chance to go there, go. It was beautiful, and it was very affordable because they're not on the euro, all right? And I had a TV in the place I stayed, and it got 2 channels in English. It got BBC, and the other channel was Jimmy Swaggart. Reruns of Jimmy Swaggart. If that isn't a definition of purgatory, I don't know what it is. And in desperation to hear a little English a few nights, I tuned into old Jimmy Swaggart reruns, okay? And he was going on about Mother Teresa. And he said, Mother Teresa thinks she's so good. The good works of Mother Teresa are evil. They're full of sin. And I'm saying to myself, I would take Mother Teresa's sins over your line any day, Buster. It's not a Catholic view. We believe in original sin as Catholics. But we do not believe that that we are utterly corrupt. Humanity, there's something wrong with humanity. There's a fracture deep in our heart, in our soul. But we're not utterly corrupt. We're fundamentally good. We're just a little bit screwed up. All right? A Catholic view of original sin is that we're like irregular items at Marshall's or TJ Maxx. You know? You ever go? I love those. I mean, I was 25 years old before I found out that irregular wasn't a designer label, okay? And it's good stuff, isn't it? You know, I learned from my mother, never pay full price for anything, okay? And, you know, you've got a $80 shirt, it's missing a button, it's got a little string. You're going to throw it out? No. You know, you fix it. Maybe it's got a little stain, send it to the cleaners. You get it for $5. It's a bargain, you know, but you don't throw it out. It's fundamentally good. We as human beings, despite the fracture in our nature, despite the flaw, we're fundamentally good. The Lord doesn't discard us. The grace of Jesus wants to fix us. There's a hymn that's often sung in the black community. If you've ever been to an African American church, there's a hymn they sing, "Fix me, Jesus." It's beautiful, isn't it? Fix me, Jesus. Because the Lord came to fix us. Knowing that we come from the blessed hand of God and that we are fundamentally good, although a little bit screwed up. That's the basis. That's a Christian basis for a healthy attitude of self-affirmation. This isn't pop psychology. This is deep theology. This is biblical doctrine. That we are fundamentally good, but we need help. The big picture in life also means integrity. Integrity, which is often seen as honesty. When we use the word integrity at a popular level, we usually mean honest. This is a man of integrity, a woman of integrity is an honest person. It means that, but that word integrity is far richer and deeper and more expansive than simply honesty. The word integral is contained in that word integrity. To be integral is to be put together, to hang together. Now, I speak Spanish as well as English, and you know, what we call whole wheat bread in Spanish, pan integral. Integral bread. I mean, the kernel of wheat is not all busted up, okay, and separated. It's whole grains, integral. Hangs together, it's put together. Sometimes we say to somebody, get your act together. Get your life together. Put that life back together with a sense of integrity, with a sense of purpose, a life that is going somewhere, a life that has some meaning, a life that is improving. The great Jewish scholar, Abraham Joshua Heschel, and if you've never read anything by Abraham Joshua Heschel, I highly recommend that you pick up some of his writing. And especially there's several collections of essays. They're short. You don't have to read the whole book at a sitting. You can pick it up and read it as you like. And in one of his essays, he says that unless each and every day we strive to be more than human, we end up becoming less than human. Very profound. Because we have come from that blessed hand of God, because we are fundamentally good, despite our flaws, there's no limit to goodness, the goodness to which the human heart is capable of striving. And unless we strive each and every day to be more than human, we end up becoming less than human. You have to work at it. A life of faith, a life of integrity, a life of goodness, you have to keep striving and working at it. It's like, you know, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? You take the number 1 train. Practice. Oh, you said, oh, another New York joke. We're sick and tired of you people from that end of the state. Huh? But you have to work at it. Practice. A great musician has to practice. And the greatest of musicians, they practice 4, 5, 6 hours every day. And you might say, you could knock off, you got that piece down. Maybe no one would notice, but they would notice. To keep on top of their game. It's the same thing with an athlete. You got to practice. You got to keep working at it. Okay, you ran the fastest mile, you got to bring it down by a few seconds. And if you don't keep working at it, as Heschel says, we become less than human. Did you ever see a 50-year-old football player? A mess, okay? So they go to seed. You got to keep working at it. And to be a person of integrity, you got to keep working at it. Basically, we're talking about goodness. We're talking about integrity. It's the highest compliment you could pay to anybody. It's probably the greatest adjective in the English language or in any language, and it's the simplest. It's the simplest compliment and the most profound. To call someone a good person. My mother said that about my dad, and before he died, she said it. She said, and they were both retired at that point, getting on each other's nerves, by the way, which I think retirees here know about, right? But she said, your father is a good man. And then she said something very interesting. She said, and you don't have to say anything else after that. That says it all. He's a good man. It includes all, you don't have to add a lot of flowery adjectives. It includes everything. To be good. We call St. Joseph, good St. Joseph. You don't have to heap a lot of other fancy adjectives on him. Good St. Joseph, it says it all. The good shepherd, it says it all. We strive to have that said about us. Now, Mark Twain, he wrote about someone and described them as a good person in the worst sense of the word. And we have them, don't we? Oh, yeah. There are people, they're good in the worst sense of the world. These are the goody two-shoes, They're so good, and they're going to make sure that you measure up to their definition of goodness. These are the traffic cops. And we have them in our churches, don't we? Oh, we have them. They're out there. They are good, and they're going to make sure everyone else follows the rules as strictly as they think they do. And these are the people that report to Father, and you've heard them, Father, I'm sure, and I know Father Reef back there. He's hiding, but he's back there behind you. But sometimes you get people to come to you, don't they? They say, well, Father, you see that couple coming up there in the aisle, you see they never got an annulment. I know that because I was in their former parish, and they're going to communion. Mind your own damn business. Yeah, well, there's that other couple, you see, and I don't think they're married, you see. They're kind of shacked up, those two senior citizens there. Mind your own damn business. And then you see those two guys. You ever notice they come in the same car? And they're coming up to communion there. Something funny there. Mind your own business. Who died and made you God? You got enough problems in your own life. One of the things Pope Francis said in that famous interview, which somebody did give me a copy of it, and I haven't had time to read it yet. I've read excerpts. But he said that he's sick and tired of a lot of people in recent years that write to Rome. I've been written up. I would have been disappointed if I wasn't, But there are people in our churches. They're right. Oh, the priest didn't do this, and oh, the priest forgot this and forgot that. Oh, he didn't have the right color on, and all this craziness. And Pope Francis said his Vatican doesn't have time for that. Handle that at the local level. You got a problem, go talk to the guy yourself. There are people that are good people in the worst sense of the word. And that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about a real sense of integrity. The big picture in life also means to have goals. We need something to strive for, a sense of purpose in life. It's very important for young people. A lot of young people have tuned out because they don't see any hope. This is the first generation in our country, many of whom will not attain the level of living that their parents attained. It's sad. There was a time when one salary could buy a house and a car and support a family. A lot of young people, that dream is not there. It's not feasible. They need a sense of purpose. They need a sense of dreams. They need a goal to shoot for. But it's not just young people. At every stage of life, we need a sense of goal, something to aim for. Even in our older years, senior citizens need a sense of goals. You say, I'm retired, I'm a widow. Well, our goals are different the older we get. I got nothing to do. There's plenty to do. We set our priorities in a different way. As Heschel said, unless we become more than human, we become less than human. The goal above all goals is God. And I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves in the spiritual life is, where does God fit into my life? Now, I'm asking that question in church, and so, everybody would say, oh, God is the most important person in my life. Well, is that obvious to him? If I ask you who's the most important person in your life, you say, well, my wife, the little woman, Oh, my husband. When's the last time you told them that? Well, I've been married 44 years. You don't have to tell her. Yes, you do. When's the last time you said, honey, I love you? Baby, you're still a knockout. Sweetheart, you still turn me on. Darling, you're still a hunk. You got prosthetic knees and hips, and a glass eye and false teeth, but you're still something, all right? You have to say it. You have to say it. God. You have to say it to God. Not that God, some people think that God is like this big egotist in the sky. We always have to keep praising him, Oh, you're wonderful, how great thou art. Oh, yeah, like he's big Donald Trump up there, Keep telling me how great I am, No, it's not. God doesn't need our praise. We need to praise God. We need to be reminded of his greatness, which is essentially goodness. To know that we are loved. What do you give God? People say, well, I give him 45 minutes on a weekend, and keep it short there, Father, Got to tee off, You give God everything. Give God everything. But God doesn't need it. He gives it back to us. You give God your family, give God your marriage, give God your kids, give God your career, your home, those things that you hold most dear. Give it to God. And he gives it back with a blessing. He doesn't keep it. It's like the sacrifice of Isaac. Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son. He understood it as the way people of his time did, in a very literal sense of putting his son on an altar and plunging a knife into him and really physically sacrificing him. But the angel held his hand. No, that's not the sacrifice God asks. A spiritual sacrifice. And he gave the boy back to Abraham. You give God what is most dear and precious, your marriage, your career, your home, and he will give it back with a blessing, and you will live that life. You'll live in that home and live in that marriage and that family with a greater sense of joy and peace and integrity than you ever thought were possible. Well, as we've said tonight, the two words up here, the equation is see it big and keep it simple. So before we turn to the second half of that equation, stand up, take that seventh inning stretch. Let me take a swig of Absolute here. How sweet it is. We could use a little cranberry juice there. Sit back down. Sit back down. See it big and keep it simple. You know, simplicity is one of the most complicated things for a lot of people. Some people just don't get it. Simplicity is so subtle. You know, some people just don't understand. I just, as I said, I came from Hungary last week, and beautiful churches there, but they're these Baroque churches, you know, just like a bit much, you know, flowing, you know, Rococo statues, and it's a bit much, you know. Some people don't have a sense of simplicity. You know, the guy has got a flock of flamingos on his front lawn, you know, 85 plastic flamingos, okay? One flamingo if you must, okay? It's just too much. It's way too much, okay? Some women, I mean, with the makeup, it's just, you know, as the Lord says, they'll take the lilies of the field, you know, the simplest flowers, the wildflower. What is more beautiful than a hothouse flower? You know? Some women, they overdo it. My mother had an aunt, and I think she put her makeup on with a mason's trowel, okay? She looked like an extra from the Peking Opera. She was afraid to smile because her face would fall off on the table, okay? Too much, okay? Way too much. Having a sense of simplicity is a great and beautiful gift. See it big, keep it simple, like the lilies of the field. Well, simplicity begins with being satisfied. There's that song, Ain't Got No Satisfaction, okay? To be satisfied is to know when enough is enough and when it's time to pull back, and more importantly, when it's time to share. When enough is enough. It's a challenge for us as human beings, because we have a tendency to gorge ourselves, not just on food, but on things, on wealth, whatever it might be. You know, when I was a little boy, and maybe you all did the same thing, did you have goldfish when you were a kid? And I'm old enough to remember, you go into Woolworths, okay? You go to Woolworths and you buy goldfish, and in those days, they came in those little cardboard boxes like the Chinese takeout, you know, except that had goldfish in it, okay? And you'd bring them home, and the man in the store said, now you don't feed them too much, because if you sprinkle too much food, they're going to eat themselves to death. They don't know when to stop. And I always thought, wow, what stupid animals, you know? It always seemed that I fed them too much or something, because they, within 5 days they're floating at the top of the bowl, and I don't know how many we flushed down the toilet during my childhood. Okay, but I thought, what a stupid animal that doesn't know when to stop. Are we any better? When is enough enough, and when is it time to share? And I'll be honest with you, this is a concept that we desperately need to re-emphasize as Christians in our society. Paul VI wrote, "Greed is a sure sign of an underdeveloped society, morality." Greed. Now, as Americans, our system is based on greed. The capitalist system. Now, I'm not a socialist. I am not moving to Cuba, all right? I have no interest in going to North Korea, all right? China is about as socialist as Wall Street at this point, okay? But it's one of the downsides of our Western system. And I'm not talking politics here, I'm talking morality, and I'm quoting the popes since 1893 down to our present day. And you're going to hear a lot of this from Pope Francis. There's a lot of it we heard from Pope John Paul. When Pope John Paul came to this country, he never ceased to talk about greed, and the greed that is a part of our system. And we have just experienced the biggest economic meltdown since the Great Depression. Why? Because of greed. When is enough enough, and when is it time to share? People that want to grab such a big piece of the pie that there's nothing left for anyone else. The CEO that makes $20 million at McDonald's or another fast food place is paying his workers $7.50. You try to live on $7.50 an hour. It's not politics, this is morality. And if you don't like what I just said, you can take it up with the Vatican. You can take it up with Pope Francis, and when you meet John Paul one day, you can take it up with him and Leo the 13th and a whole bunch of popes and bishops. Something we have to guard against. When is enough enough, and when is it time to share? The gospel yesterday was about the rich man and Lazarus. And it wasn't a gospel beating up on the rich. That's not the point. To whom much is given, much is expected. People say, well, I did it all on my own. No, you didn't, actually. Maybe you were born into it. You know? Maybe you did work hard. Who gave you the brains to work hard? You didn't come up with that on your own. And there were people along the way that opened a door and helped. When is enough enough, and when is it time to share? You can be a very selfish person and a very greedy person and be very rich, and you can be a very greedy person and be very, very poor. Most of my priesthood, I worked with very poor people. I worked with Hispanic Catholics. I lived in Puerto Rico, and before that I worked in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., worked with very, very poor people, undocumented people, illegal people, all of that. And we had a food pantry. And I remember when I was a very young priest, this young, bedraggled mother, she had like 3 little kids in tow from Guatemala, and she showed up to get her bag full of food that day. And we had a big sack of cornmeal. And she took so much cornmeal that day. We had 1 sack that was delivered. And she filled up 2 shopping bags. So much so there wasn't anything left. And I said to the nun, I said, she shouldn't be allowed to take so much. Oh, but she's poor, look, she's got those kids. I said, yeah, but somebody else is going to come in. Well, we let her get away with it. But I watched her. And she walked out the door with the 3 kids, and she stood at the bus stop. And just as she was about to get on the bus, both bags burst. My heart broke for her. She needed the cornmeal, but she didn't need that much. And somebody else who needed something wasn't going to find any. She wasn't a rich fat cat on Wall Street. But it's the same attitude. When is enough enough, and when is it time to share? And as Americans, and particularly as American Christians, as American Catholics, this is a question we must ask. Jesus put the question to us. The church has put the question to us. To be thankful for the system we live in, but to recognize that at its heart and at its worst, it can be a system fraught with greed. We do the best we can to make it a system that is responsible. And Christians have a big role to play in that. Simplicity also means a sense of independence. Freedom. We Americans, we love to talk about freedom. Everything, freedom, Freedom, in a Christian sense, is something very different. We rejoice in the freedoms we have in this country. I am grateful I can get up here and preach tonight. And I don't have to worry about being arrested or shut up or oppressed in any way. It was interesting, when I was in Hungary, I went to a museum in Budapest, the Museum of Terror, that documented the horrors of the Nazi era and the years of communism. And the whole room was dedicated to religious figures, particularly Cardinal Mindszenty, who was thrown into prison simply for speaking his mind. But freedom is not just the raw exercise of license. I can do whatever I want to do. It's a free country. We as Christians believe in the freedom of the children of God. Not the freedom to do whatever we want to do, the freedom to do the right thing. There's a lot of abuse of freedom. We live in a system of free speech, free press. People die for that, and they should. But you look at the way we abuse that system. You turn on the airwaves. Turn it off. You're not going to learn anything from most of those TV. Most cable news is junk. It's pure propaganda, whether it's propaganda on one end of the spectrum or the other. Fox News, turn it off. You're not going to learn anything. Most of us, if you're liberal, you listen to MSNBC. If you're conservative, you listen to Fox, and you never will listen to the other side. Because it's all pure propaganda. You might as well go read, Fidel Castro's scandal sheet. We have freedom of the press, but a lot of times it's abused. People say irresponsible things, and we like people to say stupid things in the media. If those stupid things agree with us, they say something stupid on the other end, oh no, we don't like that. Turn it off. If we as spectators, if we as listeners set a higher standard, they would be more responsible instead of handing us what we want to hear. But as Christians, freedom is not license to do or say whatever we want to do. It is the freedom to be good, the freedom for justice, for righteousness, to do the right thing. And that sometimes may be the unpopular thing. And that's so important to teach our kids. The freedom to stand up for what is right, that is real freedom. Especially when it's going to cost you. Because there are times in life when it's going to cost us to have the freedom not to go with the flow, not to go with the crowd, but to do the right thing, to say the unpopular thing, to challenge the crowd. That is real freedom. It's a freedom that is full of integrity. A freedom from the insecurity that forces us to go along with the gang. It's so important for us to teach children that, but it's important for us as adults, for moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas, to live that, not just to talk about it, but to show it. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson. Now, Mel Gibson's kind of gone off the deep end a little bit, but I never did see that Temptation of Christ, because I wasn't going to sit through 3 hours of Aramaic and subtitles, all right? I think Braveheart was probably his best movie. And it's the story of the 13th century Scottish freedom fighter, hero, William Wallace, who took on the British. And as an Irishman, I sort of relish that part of history. But nonetheless, William Wallace, struggling for Scottish independence. They finally caught up with him. And he's arrested, and he is sentenced to die. It's at the end of the movie. And if you remember, there he is. His hands and feet are bound. His head is laid on the chopping block. This is it. He's not going anywhere. And he's asked, "Do you have any final words?" And in a loud, proud voice, he cries out, "Freedom!" Wham! And all you hear is the thud of the axe. That's real freedom. Not to cower, not to negotiate the non-negotiable, but to stand up for what he believed in. Whether you agree with him or not is one thing, but you have to admire that courage. That's what we need, that freedom to do the right thing, especially in a world that is so influenced by media, television, the internet, that whole thing that tries to control the way we think and to channel our thinking, to stand up and for what we believe in and the principles that we hold dear. And that brings me to the next element of simplicity, which is to be mindful. To be mindful. That's a Buddhist concept, but it is one I think that we as Christians could well incorporate. To invest our decisions in life with mindfulness, with thoughtfulness, to think before we act, to base our actions and our choices on our values. And again, not to act mindlessly, to go along, to get along. And I think in this day and age, it is ever more important to teach our children how to evaluate the bombardment of information that comes at us. You know, every day we are subject to tsunamis of information. Most of it is trivia, it's nonsense. And a lot of propaganda that is trying to convince us of somebody else's point of view. Teach children to evaluate. Don't listen to everything you hear on TV or the internet. The internet is a great source of information. It's also a tremendous source of misinformation. You know, people say, well, I got that online. Well, you can put anything online, you know. You can put on the word the moon is made of cream cheese, fine, you know. It's online. That doesn't make it true. Who is evaluating? Teach your children to evaluate, to question the things that they are told, the things that they read, to know propaganda from truth or an attempt at objectivity. Because a lot of the stuff we're subject to is anything but today. And it has a lot to do with why we as a country are so divided. We are pathologically divided right now. We have never been so divided since the Civil War, and it is heated up arguments. I am so glad that this is not an election year. I hate to preach parish missions in election year. Is it a mortal sin to vote for so-and-so? It is sickening, isn't it? Last fall, during the election, I preached in Canada, and I said, thank you, Jesus. It was so easy to preach in Canada, okay? As we are so divided. We are divided as a church. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of the media that we are subject to. Invest it with mindfulness, to be thoughtful. Thoughtful in the sense of being intelligent and questioning, but perhaps also thoughtful in the sense of being respectful. We've lost sight of that as a country. You know, Barry Goldwater and Jack Kennedy were the best of friends. They really cared for each other. They couldn't agree on the time of day, but it wasn't personal. And that's what we've lost in this country. I can't fix the system, but you know what? I can do what I can in my life, and we can do what we can in our lives and our families to fix a broken system with mindfulness and with respect. Simplicity also means to be pure. Now, a lot of us grew up in a Catholic culture where purity meant one thing. It meant chastity. It meant sexual purity. And I'm not saying that it doesn't mean that, but it's a wider sense of purity that we're talking about here. To be pure is to be unadulterated. It is to be focused, to be pure of heart. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God." To be pure is to have a purity of intention. What you see is what you get. A person who's honest, a person who's upfront, a person who doesn't use others. Because, you know, what is sexual impurity? It is essentially abusing other people for me, not for them. It reduces love to lust. But that carries over into other aspects of life. Not to use others, to treat others with respect. You know, what you see is what you get. Because, you know, our Christian religion is very upfront. Where there's no secrets about what we believe. You know? It's very simple. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself when you boil it all down. It is that purity of intention, purity of the essence of what we believe and what we live, that is the beauty of this simplicity. To be simple also means to be lowly, to be humble. And that's a uniquely Christian virtue. Humility. And again, we often misunderstand humility. A lot of people, humility is seen as a kind of a self-deprecation, putting ourselves down. Oh, I'm no good at all, I'm no good at all. No, that's not real humility. Real humility is having the ability to honestly assess ourselves, the good and the bad, to accept responsibility for the bad, and to recognize the good things that we've done and that we are. You know, some people don't know how to take a compliment. You know, and a really humble person knows how to take a compliment graciously. You know, your in-laws are coming for dinner. It's the first time you've gotten together since the wedding. And they never thought that, you know, your little darling was worth their Prince Charming, okay? These people never went for you and your family. They don't think you're up to snuff. You're on the wrong side of the tracks or whatever, okay? And you want to impress them. And so you spend 2 weeks cooking and slicing and dicing and frying and baking, and you put out the most beautiful gourmet meal that has ever been seen in Charlotte or whatever you call this place, all right? Julia Childs and Emerald Lagasse eat your heart out, Food Network, all right? This is the most gorgeous banquet. You knocked yourself out. And after the meal, the old lady, the Wicked Witch of the West, She says, well, and you're wondering what she's going to come out with. This was the most exquisite meal I have ever had. And you don't know what to say. And you respond, well, the meat was a little overdone and the pie was a little mushy. Shut up! Real humility is knowing how to take a compliment. You don't say, yeah, well, I hope you people realize what class we have. Yeah, we're not, I hope you realize how much work went into that. No, that's not humility either. But humility is being able to say, well, yes, it was a lot of work, but just to hear you say that makes it all worthwhile. That's real humility. Being able to accept our failures, to accept who we are and where we've come from. Not to be ashamed of our humble roots. Some people are. They put on, people that really put on airs, they really came from some shack in the woods, all right? And they're afraid to admit it. You know who's my great hero? Because it was my dad's hero. From the time I was a boy. Harry S. Truman. When he was president, he got no respect, as Rodney Dangerfield would say. He was laughed at. He was a letdown after the aristocratic Franklin Roosevelt. Harry never went to college, had a squeaky Midwestern voice. They didn't take him seriously for a while. He had a hard time. Had a hard time passing anything. Couldn't get anything through the Congress. Didn't get the respect of his own party or the other party. And he was frustrated. And one thing about Harry, if he had a mouthful of it, he'd say it, And there was one night, they say, that at a big Washington dinner, he got up there with a tuxedo, and everybody who was anybody in Washington was sitting in that banquet hall. And he got up and he started railing against the opposition. He said, well, the Republicans are full of manure, and all they've got is manure, and all they're giving the American people is manure. And he kept using this word, manure, manure, manure. And his press secretary turned to Bess and said, Mrs. Truman, can you get the president to use another word than manure? And she says, it's taken me 35 years to get him to say manure. And that's why we loved him. Well, one of the great highlights of my life was visiting the Truman Library some years back. I was preaching in the Kansas City area, and I made a special point to go out to Independence, Missouri, to the Truman Presidential Library, and to visit his home. Bess had just died, and you were able to visit their home, which it's a big house, but by presidential standards, rather humble. In fact, Harry never had any money. The Congress had to vote a pension for the president for the first time because the only money he had to live on, he had to sell the family farm after he was president to survive. And when he died, or when they wrote their will, the Trumans stipulated that on the demise of Bess, that home would be given to the United States government, the Park Service, as a public place for people to visit. But they stipulated that it had to be left exactly as it was found on the day that Bess Truman died. Or they could keep it from falling down, but they had to leave everything in place. And when you go in there, the Life magazines are yellowing on the coffee table, just as she left it. There's a coffee cup on the kitchen table where she had left it. Harry, who'd been dead for several years before her, his hat and coat are hanging on a peg, untouched. Wallpaper's a little frayed where she would pull the cord to turn the light on and off. Very ordinary. And when you go in there, you get a pamphlet with a quote from Harry Truman on the front of it. And it says, I always wanted to remember who I was and where I came from and where I'm going back to. That's a definition of humility. And a lot of us would be healthier human beings and better Christians if we could simply remember that fact. Who we are and where we've come from and where we all end up, okay? You know? Unless you die young, you're going to end up in a warehouse somewhere. You're going to have depends on, you know. And somebody else is going to have to push you around, as the Lord said to Peter. So prepare for it now. And that leads us to the last element of simplicity, which is to be easy. To be easy. And I don't mean that the way we used to mean it at Zavarian Brothers High School in Westwood, Massachusetts, all right? But a person who is easy is a person at ease. A person at peace. A person who, like Harry, knows where they've come from and where they're going. A person that can accept themselves for good and for bad. A person who is at peace with the Lord, at peace with others, at ease, knowing that the rough edges the Lord can take care of. The good things, we give Lord credit for it. A person who is easy is a person easy to know, or easy to work with, easy to be around, easy to work for, easy to live with, because they're a person who's fundamentally at peace. Deep down. You know, life is basically an Italian submarine sandwich, all right? You got the 2 slices of bread, all right? Where we've come from, the blessed hand of God, and where we are going, the goal of heaven. And the way to get there, all the salami and the provolone and the peppers and the onions in the middle, is a life of goodness and integrity. As Helen Keller said, either life is an adventure or it is nothing at all. God love you. Thank you so much. Another little Smirnoff there. Before we take a little break, a few little reminders. You know, tomorrow, Mass at 9 o'clock, the title of the talk is Cool Off, and we're going to talk about anger. There's a lot of angry people today. And there's a lot of anger in our country, and there's a lot of anger in our church. And a lot of it is just plain downright wrong. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow. And anger in our own individual personal lives. There's enough anger in families as well, unfortunately. Tomorrow night, our talk at 7 o'clock is entitled, Brought Near, a Sense of Belonging in the Church. Tomorrow is probably the most important talk for our young people. We want to hang on to them in this beautiful church of ours. Most important talk for anybody that's been away from church. And I know some of you might have invited somebody that's been away, or they've got their problems, they've had their struggles, they got their disagreements, they got their hurts or whatever. Get them here, especially tomorrow night. Anybody that's got issues with the church, or somebody that's trying to come back and looking for a reason, we're going to talk about why we hang in there. Yeah, there are problems. The Pope is pretty aware of that, all right? And so are we, but we're hanging in there because of Jesus. Bring somebody tomorrow night who needs a positive view on why we are Catholics and why we love and embrace and cherish this crazy old church of ours. I will be hearing confessions tomorrow morning and the next morning after Mass, as long as I need to. I'm here for you if you want to see me this week. Also, we do have a question period. And I noticed that you were putting questions in there earlier this evening, and I have taken them out of the box, and they will be answered tonight. And if you've thought of anything else, write it out, put it on that piece of paper. There are papers over there. but put them in this basket. I'm only going to take the mail out of this basket. I'll be answering them tonight for about 15, 20 minutes and tomorrow night as well. A question on anything at all, it's anonymous. There's no such thing as a dumb question or an inappropriate question. And if you ask something that's a little controversial, we're not going to know who asked, all right? So you just put it in there and you'll get a good straight answer. And before we take a break, I'm going to ask my lovely ushers to come forward, darlings. And they are going to be passing out, come right down, they're passing out envelopes that will be collected on Wednesday. And we'll do this as quickly as we can, just so you can start right there, darling. And we're going to pick them up on Wednesday. Well, you knew it was coming, right? It's a Catholic church. There's going to be a collection, okay? Now, if you're not going to be here on Wednesday and you want to pass it in early, you can give it to me, you can give it to Ann, or you can give it to one of the priests, or Deacon Joe, or I just would ask you, don't leave an envelope somewhere. Don't stick it in the sacristy. Don't put it somewhere, because we don't get it, you know. Hand it to someone personally, or otherwise just wait till Wednesday, throw it in the basket when we pass it. Some people say, well, I'm not going to, you know, I don't have anything this month. I didn't get my check yet. Can I mail it? You can put a stamp on it and mail it. It goes to our Dominican preaching office. It goes to the rectory I live in Pleasantville, New York. You can put a stamp on it. I wouldn't put cash in it if you're going to put a stamp on it. And we're going to pick them up on Wednesday. Now, you may not realize it, but when we Dominican preachers are invited to your parish, we don't charge anything. Father Whelan doesn't pay me for coming here. We simply ask the opportunity to take up one collection at the end of the mission, and we take what we get. We don't shove a basket at you every night. And I never refuse a parish anywhere in this country on the basis of finance. It's not about money, it's about preaching. And whatever parish invites us, no parish is too small or too poor, too inner city or too rural. I speak English as well as Spanish, and I'm able to preach in a number of places every year that if they had to pay a speaker, they couldn't do it. I don't worry about it because your generosity allows me to do that. Wherever I go, I ask a donation of $20 a person, 20 bucks. Where can you go? 4 nights, 3 days for $20, all right? It's a bargain. It's dinner for 2 at Wendy's, okay? It's 2 bottles of cheap wine or 1 bottle of good wine, okay? It's a bargain. If you want to write a check, make the check payable to the parish. Now, obviously, if you mail it in, make it payable to me. But if you put it in the collection, which most of you do, make it payable to Holy Cross. It's easier. They give me 1 check at the end. Where does your generosity go? It goes to support the preaching. It puts gas in the car. I got to buy tires pretty soon. Last year, I put a timing belt on the car. I didn't know what that was till I got a bill for $700. That's where your money goes. It pays, quite frankly, it pays for my cell phone so I can be in touch and internet, all that kind of thing. It supports our preaching as Dominicans. It supports our older men. It supports our young men. We have about 50, 60 young men studying for the Dominican priesthood in Washington, D.C. If you've ever been to the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, you can walk right across the street and there's a Dominican House of Studies. That's where your money goes. And they're not kids, they're all college graduates. Some of them have law degrees and doctorates and master's degrees, and they want to serve you. We're very, very proud of them. That's where your generosity goes. It supports the work that we do as Dominicans, and that's why I'm not too proud to stick out my hand and beg. I ask for your generosity in this collection. But more importantly, if you don't have anything to put in the envelope, you don't have 20 bucks, you don't have anything at all, that's not why I'm here. Say a prayer for me, for all of our Dominican fathers and brothers, and if all you have is the Hail Mary to stick in that envelope, that's the greatest gift of all. But if you can be generous, all of us Dominicans, we thank you. I thank you for your patience. Stand up, take a break, grab a breath of fresh air, and put a question in that basket. We'll be back here in 5 minutes. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take our seats, please. Let's take our seats. All right. First question. Last night you spoke of God's unconditional love, agape, for his children, which is who we are. Jesus compared God's love with earthly fathers, and he said, what man among you, if his son asks for bread, would give him a stone, blah, blah. My question is, if God loves children so much, why does he allow such devastating, tragic events to occur, such as the Holocaust, the loss of innocent men, women, and children in wars, disasters? I can't imagine a father standing by doing nothing when a child is in immediate danger. What do you say? Well, the greatest mystery in Christianity is suffering. It makes no sense. So if you're looking to make sense out of suffering, that's impossible. It is without meaning. And it's the greatest mystery because it flies in the face of what we believe about God. We do believe that God is a loving Father. And you're right. Why would a loving Father, especially a Father that could prevent these things, why wouldn't he, in fact, do that? And there is no satisfactory answer to that. The only answer is the cross, which doesn't always help that much. But God did not spare his own Son. Now, not that he forced Jesus to die, not that Jesus had to pay a debt to God. That's that's sort of sick theological thinking. But the Lord did not take suffering out of the world. He redeemed us. He redeemed us in the end. In the long run, not in the short run. You know, Jesus could have come off the cross. St. Thomas Aquinas said one drop of Jesus' blood would have been enough to save us. He went the whole distance. Didn't remove suffering from the world. He removed the sting of death. He removed the finality of death. He removed the utter, ultimate senselessness of human suffering and redeemed it by opening a door beyond it. When you're going through something, it doesn't make it any easier to understand. But it's true. And that's a question we all have. If God is so good, why doesn't he prevent innocent people from suffering horribly, especially children? There is no adequate answer to that except the cross. He's redeemed suffering. He's opened a door beyond it. And it takes faith to see that. Otherwise, it makes no sense. After having received absolution from a priest and completed penance for, say, slandering someone, must I personally make peace with that person against whom I have sinned in order to have a clear conscience on the matter? Well, you know, certain things that we do that are wrong, we injure others, and we do have to make amends. We are forgiven. You know, if you steal money, if you embezzle money, you have to replace that as far as you're able. And without prejudicing or injuring your own reputation, or you're not bound, like if you steal something and you're unable to repay, you do the best you can. Or if you're unable to repay, to repay someone, directly, like you get into trouble, say, I stole $1,000 out of your cookie jar last week, so here it is, and they're going to call the police. You're not bound to put yourself in any kind of jeopardy. You can repay someone in a secret way or a gradual way, or if you're unable to do that, or you don't even know who it was you stole from, you can give it to the poor, or it's called occult compensation. You can repay in some other fashion to the extent that you're able. We are bound to do that. As far as ruining someone's reputation, slandering someone, yes, we should ask for forgiveness. Sometimes we're not able. Maybe they're dead. Maybe they're far away, or there's no way we can contact them. You do the best you can. The Lord forgives, but He does ask us, as far as it is possible, to repair the damage that we may have done to someone. Now, if it's going to get you into trouble and throw you in jail or slap you with a lawsuit, no, you're not bound in that way to put yourself at risk. But under ordinary circumstances, yes, you're right, we should. The Catholic Church does not allow priests to marry, so why does it allow married priests from other rites to convert and become married Catholic priests? Well, the Catholic Church does have married clergy. Now, not only you say from other rites, well, they actually come from other Protestant denominations, particularly Anglicans or Episcopalians, but there are ministers from other Christian denominations that convert to Catholicism, and the Church in the last generation has allowed them, under certain circumstances, to be ordained Catholic priests. So you probably have, do you have some in this diocese, Father? And they are married, and they live as married priests. So that's no news, but we've always had married priesthood in the Catholic Church. The Eastern rites, and I'm sure you have Eastern Rite churches in Rochester, do you, Father? Yes. You do. And they are Catholic, just as Catholic as we are. Their service might look more like an Orthodox service, but they are just as Catholic as we are. They recognize the Pope, and they've always been allowed to marry. That never changed. And but you do raise a good question. If we allow men from other Christian denominations, when they come into the church, to be ordained as Catholic priests and remain married, why do we impose celibacy on our own Latin Rite clergy? It's a good question. I mean, the Pope has entertained this question. It's a question of discipline, as Francis has said. It's not a matter of dogma, of doctrine. In fact, up until the 11th century, priests were allowed to marry. And the rule of celibacy was imposed not for the reasons you might think. A lot of people think it's because the church is hung up on sex. I think the church is hung up on sex today, but that's not the reason way back when. The reason was financial. Because priests were passing on lucrative parishes to their children, their sons and grandsons. Keep it in the family, Some dinky little joint, off in the woods that's got a small collection. Well, let somebody else have that. We're holding on to Holy Cross, And the church realized, and the popes realized, this was not good for the gospel. And they said the best way to handle this is to impose celibacy so that lucrative parishes, it's not about economics. In those years, there were priests that didn't say Mass. They hired somebody else to say Mass. They didn't do it. They farmed it out, but they got the earnings from these very lucrative parishes. So that was the reason celibacy was imposed. Celibacy is a gift. Now, it's not as if every priest was always married before the 11th century. Celibacy has always been at the heart of the priesthood, even when it wasn't a requirement. Jesus was celibate. And he said, for those who can do this, then it's recommended. Some of the apostles were, in fact, married. Peter, they talk about his mother-in-law. You know the only way you can get one of them, all right? You got to get married, okay? And it's not of the essence of the priesthood, but it is a special gift. But it also needs to be said that celibacy is, when it is lived out the way it should be, it is an invitation to great generosity. But it can also be an excuse for great selfishness. Depends on how it's lived. And my own personal opinion is that I think it's about time that we allowed priests to marry in the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, we have a tremendous shortage. Would it put an end to pedophilia? Actually, no, it wouldn't. Pedophilia is a disease. And if you read the newspapers, it's just as prevalent in other walks of life and among other clergy. A person who is sick in this way, who's attracted to children, is going to go after the children that are most at hand. And pedophiles that are married will abuse their own children. There's too many cases of that are very, very sad. So it wouldn't resolve that problem because essentially pedophilia is not so much a sexual issue as it is a psychological pathology, an illness. I think the priesthood would be healthier if celibate priests ministered alongside married priests. It's my own opinion. If you don't agree, you don't have to, but I think I'm free enough to say that. And, you know, the priesthood is in a crisis right now. And it's very difficult. You know, very good and wonderful men. We're working men to death. And you can only double up and triple up and quadruple up. I've been in places that a pastor, one priest has 5 parishes, not 5 churches, 5 separate parishes. I was in one place in Wisconsin, and the guy was trying to do 5 separate Easter vigils. Can you imagine doing that? Talk about the guy that spun the plates on the Ed Sullivan show. I mean, this is insane. I don't think it's wise to be closing any more churches. Yes, there are some churches that need to close, but I think we've closed too many. The shortage of priests is becoming critical. Most priests today are between 60 and 80 years old, and more of them are in the upper registers of that statistic than in the lower registers. Now there's a crop coming along, but it's not going to fill the void. We need to do something. And I personally think that maybe the Holy Spirit is saying, you know, fellas, you can do this another way. All right? And the church has always had a married priesthood. Whether the Latin Rite has had it for the last 1,000 years is another matter. But if you go to a Melkite church or a Ukrainian Catholic church, you may in fact run into a married priest. The problem is we haven't even talked about it. It's been a taboo subject. And it's not meant to be a taboo subject. It's part of our history, and it shouldn't be, prohibited to be talked about. You talked at today's Mass about fear and not letting fear of God get in the way. But in so many places in the Bible, there are references to bad things happening if we judge others, if we don't live in the right way. How can we reconcile that with the God who loves us and isn't the cop with the radar gun and so on? Well, yeah, there are consequences to our actions. There is a reckoning at the end, yes. We will be held responsible for the way we've lived. The message of the gospel is that Jesus came into the world to save the world, not to condemn the world, to show us that there's another way of living, and to empower us through the grace of his cross and resurrection, to empower us to live in that way. But the bottom line is we're free to say yes or no, and we will one day have to answer for the bad things that we've done. And some people do some really, really bad things, and they have a lot to answer for. Is yoga for exercise against the Catholic faith? No, I mean, it's not my thing. If I got down on the floor, I might not get up again. But no, yoga, it does come from an Eastern tradition. It does come, I think, yoga goes back before Hinduism even. It is practiced in the East, in Asia. It does come from that environment. But yoga that is practiced for meditative purposes, to calm down, for health reasons, for exercise, of course it's acceptable. It's just as acceptable as jogging around the block. Now, a Catholic view of meditation, a Christian view, is different than an Eastern view. Our view of meditating is not to empty oneself, but to fill oneself. To empty oneself of distractions, of the negativity, in order to be full of truth and to be full of Jesus Christ and the gospel. And the techniques of yoga are effective in that regard and are practiced by many, many Christians, and that's a good thing. I mean, there are some extremists, and I've heard it on some, Catholic media that, this is a mortal sin and yoga. No, it's like, no, it's not, okay? The best of Catholicism is, as Aristotle said, in the middle. In the middle is virtue, a balance, blessed balance. And if there's anything that is lacking in our society right now and in the church, it is that blessed balance. And I happen to think that Pope Francis is hitting the reset button to reset us on a course that is balanced and not extreme in one end of the spectrum or the other. I would like some clarification. You spoke the first evening about pornography. The eyes are in the eyes of the beholder. But there is a part that the beauty and sacredness is violated in pornography. Isn't that true? Well, that's what I said. Now, is a naked picture pornography? No. In fact, you can go into a lot of Catholic churches in Europe, especially Italy, and there's a lot of naked people on the walls and ceilings of those churches, okay? Especially in the Renaissance. The statue of David is a religious statue. It is not in a church right now, but it used to be, okay? And David without a fig leaf, all right? And it's a sacred statue. Is that pornographic? No. I do not think that that's pornographic, nor did Michelangelo, and nor did the popes that commissioned it, okay? The Sistine Chapel, commissioned by a pope, who was actually a bad pope, but nonetheless he was the pope. Had a couple of kids and so on, but nonetheless, that's in the Sistine Chapel. People from all over the world go to see it, and these are naked, very naked people. Okay, is it pornographic? No. Pope John Paul actually wrote about this. If you've never read his Theology of the Body, which was a book he was working on and he was going to publish, and yet he got elected pope, and he didn't know how, at that time, popes didn't really publish books. But he was rather innovative. He gave it as a series of talks, and it is published in book form. And he deals with sexuality, the theology of human sexuality. And he takes up in several of those talks and chapters the difference between pornography and art. There's a difference between a naked Greek statue or something in a church or whatever, or a piece of art from the Renaissance, and a pornographic magazine. And the difference is our attention is focused on the wholeness of the beauty and the true human beauty. I mean, we didn't come into the world, with socks and shoes and pants and shirts on, okay? I mean, the human body is the gift of God. It is meant to be something beautiful. And pornography perverts the human body and focuses on the more prurient aspects, where one's attention is drawn not to the wholeness or the integrity of the beauty of the body, but certain body parts. That would be the definition of, or the difference between pornography and and true art. Now, there are some very, very strict Christians, as there are strict Muslims particularly, and very strict Orthodox Jews that you don't show any skin at all. But when I was a young priest, I was preaching, and it was the summertime, and I don't have a shirt on under this, and I'm making gesture, and one lady said, "Father, your naked arms." Well, I said, lady, you got the problem, not me. You're the one that's got, you're the one that's, not just uptight, but you're the one with the dirty mind. Get real, okay? And that's, so there is a difference, but those essays by John Paul are a very good place to start. I know that we will face a judgment upon death. I've heard more than one teaching that there is a final judgment, a general judgment, and that we'll see all the sins that we've done and of others. If our sins are absolved in confession and God chooses to remember them no more, then why would they be brought up in the general judgment? That's a very good question. And because when we die, we're judged right then and there, and we will know right then and there how we have lived. The general judgment, to me, it's like the general roundup at the end of it all. The way that we have lived as individuals, we set within the whole of human history, and how our actions, for good or for bad, have affected the whole human race. And those people, let's face it, there are people that have been oppressed and stepped on, whose rights have been denied, whose humanity has been denied, who've been abused. And they never got justice. They will in the end. And the people that seem to get off the hook in this life, in the end, they won't. And we will all know. We will all know how we have lived. The judgment has already been rendered, but it will be a judgment on the whole history of humanity, the history of the universe. That's the best way I can explain it, because it is also a mystery. I have a family member who is gay. I feel uncomfortable not believing in gay marriage. How should I react? What did Pope Francis say? Who are we to judge? Which doesn't say, well, I'm okay, you're okay, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to live. It's a recognition that we accept people. There may be aspects of their lives that we find difficult to approve of, but we accept them as human beings. And that's what Pope Francis was saying. And the one thing I like about him, he's real. He's able to address these questions in a head-on way. He's not afraid to take questions from reporters. And it's about time we had a pope, especially in the 21st century, that can do that. World leaders are expected to be able to handle questions that are really on people's minds. And I'm glad he did that. And he said it in a wise way. He didn't say, oh, fine, you're gay, that's fine, live any way you want. He didn't say that. There's a lot of things about a lot of people that perhaps we don't approve of, or that the church doesn't approve of. A lot of times we do focus in so much on matters of sexuality that we forget that there are a lot of other aspects of people's lives that are worse. I think some of these fat cats on Wall Street that basically destroyed people's lives, their economies, their retirement funds, and all of that, that's a bigger sin than somebody, masturbating, okay, a few times. In my humble opinion. We all do things that separate us from the love of God and the community. And it's up to us to create an environment where people feel welcome, where people can deal with the things that they have to deal with. And let's face it, issues of sexuality are a big item on the plate that we all have to deal with. It takes a lifetime to integrate a healthy Christian biblical view of sexuality into one's life. That's not something that one gets easily. And the challenges are different as we move through life. And those challenges are different for someone who is attracted to members of their own gender, gay people. The church is a place for people to struggle. It's not a place to exclude people from because they don't measure up, because none of us would measure up. There are, we as Catholics, we don't approve of divorce. Well, there are a lot of divorced people. And there are a lot of divorced people, and it's not their fault. It takes two to tango. It only takes one to stop the dance. We want to throw people out? We used to. No? We used to make people feel as if they had a scarlet letter because they were divorced. The shame. And children bore that shame. We treated children born out of wedlock, illegitimate children. You could not be ordained a priest if you were born illegitimately. Well, in God's world, there's no such thing as an illegitimate child. All right? All children are legitimate. All children have a Father in heaven. All children have come from God. Those are human categories. But there was a time when we excluded people on that basis. We uphold the integrity of marriage and the beauty of marriage. Some people, for one reason or another, it falls apart. We are there to help people and to love people. People that are struggling, gay people that are struggling to live a healthy and holy life, need to be a part of our community, not to be excluded from it. And they need to know that when they fall, that they can be forgiven. We all can be forgiven because none of us measures up. How many of us here would like our sexual history to be displayed on the screen? All right? We'd go flying out that door like nobody's business. And it's no different with gay people. It's hard to understand, okay? Human sexuality, period, is hard to understand. It's a mystery. If you figured it all out, please tell me, all right? Because it remains a mystery at an emotional level, at a biological level, and certainly at a spiritual level. You don't have to approve of your family member. You don't have to approve of the lifestyle, but you approve of them as a human being, and you don't exclude them. And you don't exclude their significant other. You open your heart and your home. It's not up to you to approve. We leave things to God and to Jesus. And it's far better for people to struggle within the fold of this family than to try to struggle outside. And I think Francis hitting the reset button has, in many ways, not changed the doctrine. That's not going to change. But you change the way that we go about preaching that and presenting it to people and making it more accessible to people, to bring them to Jesus and not to turn them away. What unbiased news network do you tune into? Well, that's a good question. There is no unbiased news network, okay? Pure objectivity exists only in the mind and eye of God. But there is such a thing as responsible journalism. And I think, especially in the 20th century, because of schools, responsible and good schools of journalism in this country, have turned out some very, very fine reporters. But there's always been yellow journalism in this country. There have always been rags, and of course with the expansion of media, there are more opportunities for yellow journalism. But there are, I think that, I will say cable news does not, and they would be very honest admitting that they do not hold themselves to the same standard as the networks do. There are some newspapers that hold themselves to a higher standard than others. Quite frankly, I think the New York Times, that liberal New York Times. Well, people that say that never read it, actually. Yeah, the editorial page is liberal. The op-ed page, you will read responsible, conservative thinkers, not propagandists. And it also goes for left-wing thinkers, not propagandists. The Wall Street Journal, a very conservative newspaper. Very conservative editorials. They also have an op-ed page, which is very responsible. They make a point of fact-checking, and there's a high standard there. As far as the electronic media, I do think PBS. It's not as sexy. It might be a little boring. NPR, I think, has a higher standard than many of the talk shows. It's pure propaganda, whether it's on the right or the left. This is not a question of ideology. It is pure propaganda. And I think it's important to know when you're being propagandized. I'm in the propaganda business. I'm not an unbiased preacher. Preaching is propaganda. I mean, the office in the Vatican that is in charge of mission work of the church is called Propaganda Fide, the propagation of the faith. We propagate. I'm biased. I'm biased in favor of the gospel. It's not all up for grabs. I'll tell you that right up front. But know when you're being propagandized, and know when there is some attempt, as humanly possible, and we all fail, to be unbiased. And I think today it is very, very important. Because of the division, we have never been so divided in this country. The negativity, the level of hatred that people are leaving Congress because people that have been in Congress for a long time, whether Republican or Democrat, they say, there was a time we'd sit down and we'd have coffee together, we'd visit each other's homes, we could nail out a compromise. That doesn't happen anymore, and they're fed up with it. They said, this is not what I got into, and there's something very sad about that. And it also happens in the church. And I think, again, Francis is trying to hit that reset button to focus on the fact that we're all Christians. We may disagree on some things, but you can be a liberal and be a Catholic. And you can be a conservative and be a Catholic. But just recognize that you've got to respect people whose opinions you don't agree with, and realize that they're also part of this. And this leads me, there's a question here. I don't know how to handle my increasing anger toward the president. I've never in 77 years hated anyone like I hate him and his support to kill innocent babies with tax dollars. I feel like I'm forced to participate in this grave sin, and it makes me very angry. And then there's this HHS mandate, but you said to keep it short. Well, but I can't even pray for him anymore. Well, again, I think that's an incident of way over the top excess. Don't have to agree with the President of the United States. He is the President of the United States, And he is a good man, whether you like him or not, whether you voted for him or not. John McCain, I think, I really admired what McCain said when he ran against him. And there was that crazy old lady in Iowa that said, he's a Muslim, he's a terrorist. And John McCain said, he's a good man. He's a family man. He's a Christian. And that kind of attitude is the kind of attitude we need. You don't have to agree with the guy. It's not as if he invented abortion, okay? It's been around for a long time. And quite frankly, I don't think in my lifetime I'm going to see an end to it. I don't think in your children's lifetime we're going to see an end to it. We have to learn to sit down and hammer this thing out and work to reduce abortion. Abortion is, it's a moral issue, and it's wrong. Abortion is wrong. The taking of fetal life is wrong. It is horrific. It's a medical issue. It is an economic issue. Women do not have abortions because they hate their babies. There are some pathological people out there. Most women have an abortion because they don't see any way out. And quite frankly, when you start cutting funds for women and infant and children, you're going to expect, we can expect more abortions, period. Single moms, you've got crazy people that, want to deport everybody and take their jobs away, and, well, you're going to see more abortions. We need, as a society, to be able to sit down and say, okay, maybe we don't agree with each other on this, but if the president, I mean, my opinion is if the president says, you know, abortion should be legal and rare, I'd hold his feet to the fire and say, okay, we're going to sit down with you as Catholics. You know, we don't like the fact that it's legal, but we'd like to make it rare. How can we work together to do that? How can we make it possible for women to have their children, have their babies, for those babies to be supported, that they don't have to worry? You know, a single mom, an 18-year-old that's got 2 kids, okay, she shouldn't have had those 2 kids, but she has them, and they're children of God. And she's got to go out and clean houses and take 5 buses and leave those kids alone or leave them with God knows whom. You know, we care about that as Christians. And as Christians, we ask the deeper questions. It's not just a simple question of right and wrong. If we're going to right the wrongs that are out there, we have to roll up our sleeves and come up with realistic solutions. You don't have to like the guy, but he is in charge for the next 3 years. We got to work with him, okay? And what's that? Well, I'm not going to get into that, ma'am. I'm just not going to get into that tonight. You know, you can not like the guy, but we can't hate people. You know? And I said, well, whoever wrote this hates him. You know, I said this, and I'm not taking live questions. That's why I have them written out, because we're not going to get into a shouting match here. But it's indicative of this negativity that is rife in this society. And abortion's been around for a long time. It's been around since 1973, and suddenly it's reached this crescendo of hatred. And we're never going to solve this problem. We're never going to protect babies in the womb if it's all we do is shout at one another. And I would hope that the Catholic Church would have a better modus operandi of dialogue and sitting down and talking with people with whom we disagree. And it's not only the president that we disagree with on this, but many, many politicians who are good people. And as Catholics, we have to realize there are good people, there are church-going people in this town that go to church on Sunday and worship Jesus Christ and believe in God and the Bible, and they call themselves pro-choice. I find that hard to accept, but they're good people. There are ministers in a community like this. They're good people. And we're not going to solve it by simply vilifying them. We have to dialogue. We have to work together. You know, people don't support abortion because they hate babies. They think they're doing right. I don't think they're doing right. They think they're doing the right thing. We need to dialogue to convince them, no, there's a better way to do this. How can we work together to provide for these children and these mothers? And the very simplistic solution is, just forget about it. We're going to cut the funds, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to outlaw abortion. Do we want people to end up in back alleys again? No. We want mothers to know that those children will be supported. And quite frankly, that costs money. We as Christians put our money where our mouths and where our hearts are, because it's the right thing. And if you don't agree with it, you don't have to. I'm not God, and isn't that good news tonight? God love you. Let's get something to eat. Good night. Thanks. God bless. Thank you. Thank you. All right. We'll